Well, we want to welcome a special guest today. It's Tom Luginbill. He's part of the recruiting and the scout with college football at ESPN, as long as a sideline reporter. I also heard, to break the ice real quick with you, Tom, that you were once a quarterback at Georgia Tech. So we're going to have to ask you a few questions about that, but very thankful to have you. Just wanted to start off with a quick question about Georgia Tech. Tell us about your time playing college football, and if you got to play any professionally, where that was and what that looked like for you.
Yeah, I was a little bit of an enigma. I was a late bloomer coming out of high school. I played in a wing T offense in San Diego at Torrey Pines High School. Really wasn't recruited at all. I was on the shorter side. I was lean. I played receiver, running back, and quarterback. Hadn't really settled in as a quarterback yet, so I decided to transfer or to attend junior college my first 2 years. And that was where I really grew and blossomed. Ended up going 22-1 in 2 years, won the junior college national championship, broke dozens of records, and ended up being recruited 2 years later, fairly heavily. Ended up at Georgia Tech, transferred there, was the starter my junior year, had a terrible year as a program. Coach gets fired, new coach comes in, they start to run the option. I'm not an option guy, I'm a thrower. I ended up transferring and finishing up at Eastern Kentucky under the legendary Roy Kidd. So I had a great college experience. I mean, I was a 4-year starter. I never redshirted, got to play at 3 different levels of college football. Was involved in 2 quarterback competitions. Actually, when I arrived at Georgia Tech, they had a returning starter, and I had to beat him out. And then when I arrived at Eastern Kentucky, I had to battle in training camp for the starting job. And so I'd like to say that I've earned a lot of my playing time over the course of 4 years. And then I had the opportunity to play in the Arena Football League for a couple of years. And really, I used the money I made in the Arena Football League to pay for grad school. Earned my master's degree. And at the time I was working in NFL Europe and, getting into scouting, getting into coaching. And then, after that, spent really the next 10 to 11 years as either a position coach, coordinator, player personnel director, scout, at a variety of spots in professional football before joining ESPN in let's see, it would have been January of 2005. So going on 18 years here now at ESPN.
That is
Yeah,
incredible, man. I can't even imagine.
yeah. So I guess my first question when you go through that timeline would be so what convinced you from taking it from basically a coaching role into getting into recruiting and kind of starting with ESPN? What was that transition like?
Well, part of it was the team I was coaching folded. I wasn't left with many choices. So, I've been in NFL Europe. I've been in the first iteration of the XFL as a coach. I worked for the Dallas Cowboys. I've worked in the Arena Football League. Kind of bounced around to a lot of different spots. Wore a lot of different hats. I was a head coach. I was a director of player personnel. I was a director of football operations. So I kind of had my hands in a lot of different areas. And I had started going to work for a scouting company, an independent scouting company called Scouts Inc. back in 2003, 2004. And I was just doing some side work for them, doing player evaluation at the NFL level for free agent market analysis, in the sense that when a guy became a free agent, we would do a deep dive. We would evaluate and scrutinize and try to come up with what we think his market value actually is based off of what his production level was. And then it started to morph into more player evaluation of training camp cuts, guys on the street, who's available for teams to sign throughout the fall. And as I was doing that, I started to realize that, maybe I don't have to be in coaching to be happy. I loved coaching, but I was newly married, was wanting to start a family. And it's a lot easier to be in that profession when you don't have any other responsibilities. When you have other responsibilities, the time that it takes and being away from home or being on the road or being in the office at 5 a.m. or 11:30 at night, it can take a toll. And what I found was the happy medium for me was I love the player evaluation side. I love the scouting side. There was a lot more stability in it. So I'm the head coach at Detroit in the Arena Football League, and I'm kind of weaning myself out anyway and doing more and more, I guess you could say, side hustles, as they'd call them these days. But I was working as a contract worker in player evaluation, and not knowing it at the time, but our group, Scouts Inc., had media contracts with we had contracts with NFL franchises, but then we had a multimedia side where we served at the time like CNN, SI. We serviced magazines, but we also did a lot of behind the scenes work for ESPN. Nobody would have ever known it. We would provide content behind the scenes, and they'd use that to help educate their broadcasters, get them information, do film breakdowns, do game studies, all of that stuff. We were just a behind the scenes unit. Well, all of a sudden our contract's up with them at the time, who I was working for at Scouts Inc. And ESPN had come to our company and said, hey, listen, instead of just doing some contract work, how about we purchase you? How about we bring you under the Disney umbrella? And at that time, the franchise I was working for had already folded. And just as anything in life, guys, it's all about timing, being in the right place at the right time. And I happened to be in that right place at the right time. And the individual I was working for at the time said, hey, listen, we may have an opportunity to branch off into some different areas. And if you're interested, I may have a full-time gig for you, but I can't have you going back into coaching. If we're going to embark on this thing, I need to know that you're committed and that you're going to stay in. And sat down and talked about it with my wife, and really had to make sure I had the coaching part out of my blood and could be happy doing what I was doing. Well, long story short, I decided to say yes. I take on the job, and ESPN launches ESPNU, the All College Network, in the spring of 2005. At the same time, they launched when I say at the time, ESPN was not covering recruiting. They certainly weren't covering it from a player evaluation perspective, and they weren't covering it from a film study, grade, rank, apply stars. That's not what they were doing, but they wanted to. And so we put together a proposal for how we would like to do it. We wanted to be different than the internet websites out there, the rivals.com. 247 wasn't around yet. On3 wasn't around yet. But at that time, it was basically scout.com and Rivals. And we were kind of the newcomer. And they were more of a sub-based model, team-oriented websites, rumor mill stuff. Where's so-and-so going? Is so-and-so narrowed his choices down to 5? When is so-and-so going to make their announcement? We went actually the opposite direction. We didn't really care about that stuff. We kind of felt like that was going to take care of itself. We wanted to be on the what makes this guy special, what makes him unique, what are his strengths, what are his weaknesses, and where would we project him at the next level? And that was a proposal that we put forward. And so, again, right place, right time, I ended up heading that up, and we started it from the ground up in the spring of 2005. Well, naturally, those at the time that were heading up ESPNU, they felt like, wow, there's a natural marriage between an all-college-based network and recruiting. And recruiting was starting to blow up. And that's actually how I fell totally backwards into television. When I signed on at ESPN, I was supposed to be completely a behind-the-scenes digital contributor, watching film, applying grades, giving guys star rankings, and I was fine with that. And to this day, I would have been fine with that. Got asked to do a couple of television shows here and there. Next thing you know, I get asked to do more, get asked to do another one, and then 2 or 3 shows a week. And it turned into a full-time television gig that is now morphed from just doing recruiting to hosting studio shows to either being a sideline analyst or a sideline reporter or both, serving as a host or an analyst for a TV show or both at the same time. And I've always just kind of felt like the more you can do, the more versatile you are, and the harder it is for them to get rid of you. And so every time I was asked to do something, I never said no. I always said, yeah, right. Okay, yeah. Even if I didn't know how to do it, I would figure it out. But I wanted to make sure that I kind of became a bit of a Swiss Army knife, if you will. And 18 years later, here we are. I had a game on Thursday night to kick off our high school weekend, got another one on Saturday night. And next Monday night, Labor Day, me and my broadcast partner of 9 years, Dave Pash, and going on my second year with Dusty Dvorak, we'll be broadcasting ESPN Primetime, Clemson, and Georgia Tech.
So I wanted to ask you, I think it's pretty interesting. So you played at Georgia Tech. Is it odd now to go back and do games there, or does it feel the same as any other game when you go back there?
Well, it feels the same as any other game, particularly now because so many years have passed. I was the starting quarterback there in the fall of '94. There are very few people still actually within the program that I would have been known or been affiliated with. And I say that But at the time, our academic advisor is now their athletic director, Todd Stansberry. So,
That's
you know,
crazy.
that's a
That's
connection
crazy.
that I still have there. To be quite honest with you, one of the things, you know, I grew up the son of a coach, and when you know, you in our career, in our line of work, you're constantly being accused of being biased. Oh, you hate my team. You hate my team. You know what my answer is? No, I hate all the teams. Trust me. Ask every fan base. Ask every fan base in America. They'll tell you I hate them, right? Because if you're not saying anything good about that fan base, you obviously are biased against them. And I've always found that growing up the son of a coach, you know who you're a fan of? You're a fan of whatever team is putting food on the table. And so you don't necessarily have this unified allegiance to one program. So let's just say you guys may have grown up in the state of Alabama. You come out of the womb and you're either Auburn or Alabama, right? Or, you know, you come up in Louisiana and you're a diehard LSU fan. Well, I wasn't in that type of environment, and it's actually made it a lot easier for me as a broadcaster because I don't have a horse in the race. And I love Eastern Kentucky. I love Palomar College. I love Georgia Tech, all equally, good times, bad times, anything in between. But when it comes down to it, it's about telling the story. It's about following the bouncing ball. And when we have a matchup, we're going to prepare the matchup to the best of our ability and call it like we see it. It's the only way you can do it.
That's very interesting. I work at a radio station for the University of Oklahoma and their sports stuff, but I grew up a huge Oklahoma State fan, and people can hear it in my biases. So when they hear me on the radio, I'll get tweets here and there where people are like, "Hey man, like you don't like OU, you hate OU." So I understand that completely. That's very interesting that you said that.
Oh yeah.
We wanted to ask you, how has the recruiting changed in your time from starting off and then end of 2005 when it started to get more, I guess, national coverage, and how has it looked since NIL? Like, what's been the biggest change you've seen over your time covering recruiting?
So the most significant initial change was obviously the growth of the internet. There's no question about that. And at the time of the growth of the internet, which from an internet exposure perspective, that was probably between 2002 and 2005, where it really started booming, and you have internet websites covering it. And right around that same time was when we started to see all of these teams just throwing out offers. And really it started with Nebraska. It started with Nebraska just going out and offering 250 guys. They didn't know if they would take 20 of them, but they just offered them. Well, then what does everybody else feel like they've got to do if they want to be in the race with the kid? Now they feel like they've got to offer early. And that's what kind of created this huge rat race of early identification and early offers, which has led to an awful lot of poor communication, an awful lot of decisions that coaches have had to make that they probably wish that they hadn't because they got to back out of something that they committed to. And the problem is once you let that paste out of the tube, you can't put it back in. So now we've created this huge rat race of all of these kids and all of these offers being thrown out there. And by and large, many of them aren't committable at the time. You know, I've also often said to a kid will say, "Oh, I got this offer and this offer and this offer." I say, call each and every one of those coaches right now and say you want to commit today and see what they tell you. Honestly, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I think the biggest shift initially was the coverage on behalf of the internet, because you couldn't hide things anymore. Coaches and teams couldn't hide guys that they'd found. They couldn't hide hidden gems. It wasn't like the old days. Now all of these kids can talk to each other on the internet. They're at camps and combines. They know what they're being told by the same school and what's that kid now being told. In the old days, none of that stuff existed. All right, so that was a huge, huge shift. But now we're in an entirely different world. Quite frankly, I think a very, very dangerous world, and I love it for the player. But between the transfer portal and between the extra year of eligibility that was afforded to everybody during COVID, and then obviously, as you mentioned, name, image, and likeness, we are in a world unlike anything we've ever been in before. And unfortunately, we've now taken the most transformative legislation you can make an argument in the last 40 years, maybe since the late 80s, that we have seen in college athletics, and we dumped it on the laps of everybody with no rules, no guidelines, no blueprint on how to execute it. It's an absolute free-for-all. And you know, it's making the job of everybody, not just the coaches, but the players, the parents, the third-party handlers, the runners. everybody's job has gotten a lot more difficult. And the one thing too that I would say, and I say this to prospects all the time, is there's always going to be a trickle down effect. If we're going to have the transfer portal be an open window to go whenever you want to, one time for free without having to transfer down, and we also gave everybody an extra year of eligibility, because let's not forget, when the pandemic occurred and they afforded an extra year of eligibility, they didn't just give it to everybody in the last year of their eligibility. They gave it to everybody on the roster. So some of this is still 2 years away from being resolved. Well, if you have the transfer portal and you've got the extra year of eligibility, do the math. There's not enough scholarships for everybody. So if a program's going to withhold, let's just say 7 scholarships or 10 scholarships for the transfer portal, okay, or for keeping an extra player on their roster for an extra year with his extra year of eligibility, guess who doesn't have access to that scholarship now? The high school player. The high school player is the player that suffers in all of this. And that's one of the reasons why I tell kids all the time, listen, a scholarship now is far more of a hot commodity than it ever was before. It was a privilege before, and now if you have a scholarship offer and it's committable, don't play games, because eventually for everybody, the music's going to stop and there are going to be a lot of people left without a chair, and that is changing college athletics. Now, we could, the four of us could sit on this podcast right now, and we could do 5 hours on name, image, and likeness. I mean, there's the positives, the negatives, the unintended consequences, the fact that we're dealing with younger and younger people, and because they're not employees, you can't put performance clauses in their contracts. So, for example, the case of Miles Brennan, there's nothing anybody can do about the NIL deals that he signed. He gets that money no matter what. Well, that's not the real world. That's not how the real world works. Do you go out and have a job and get paid a bunch of money or get a bunch of endorsements and then not have to do anything to earn it? No.
I wish.
We all wish, right? And so I think that's a little bit dangerous. And again, we could go down so many paths with that, but it's a whole new world out there, guys.
No doubt.
All right, so our next question is, what do you look for when you go and watch a recruit and analyze them? Aside from their ability and everything, do you look out for anything else they do while they're out there?
You know, the one thing that I think in player evaluation and scouting, and it's very subjective, okay, and that's why everybody has different opinions on it.
Yeah.
The easy part nowadays with technology, quality of film angles, camps and combines, all the ability to gather verifiable, measurable data, evaluating the athletic part of it has become the easy part. Okay, you can turn on the tape and, all right, this guy can play. All right, now what level can he play at, right? Because there's a reason there's different levels of college football, because there's different levels of talent. Not everybody can play at Alabama, but a lot of people could be scholarship players and play at Miami of Ohio or play at East Carolina or what have you. And so you got to project at what level that you think they're going to be. But the height, weight, speed, hand size, arm length, 40-yard split, 10-yard split, 3-cone L drill, 5-10, 20-yard short shuttle. We can gather all of that stuff, and it's great to build a library on the prospect. But I think there's one very important question, regardless of it, whether it's high school to college or college to the NFL, that you have to, the best of your ability, get the answer to, and that is, does this person love football? Does he like football? Does he like what football gives him? Does he like getting recruited? Or does he love football? Does he love the grind? Does he love the 5 a.m. workout? Does he love the sacrifice that has to be made? If you can find that out, you have yourself a pot of gold. That's first and foremost. And then I think ultimately, and I share this with so many kids and parents and those in this that are coming up in the ranks of getting recruited, and they're embarking on this whole new deal. I can't tell you over the course of the last 18 years, and when I say 18 years, that's just dealing with the high school athlete, but prior to that, previous 10 or 11 years in pro football, how many prospects I've seen, whether they're 15 years old, 18 years old, 27 years old, that have all the physical attributes. They have the height, the weight, the speed, they're explosive, they're flexible, they can bend, they can do all of the things that you check the boxes on. And they don't pan out. And you have to ask yourself why. Why didn't this guy pan out? 99.9% of the time, it has nothing to do with a physical attribute. So what we're trying to identify is, does he have a character flaw? All right. Is there a substance abuse problem? Is there an at-home problem? All right, that he's dealing with that maybe nobody knows it's having a dramatic effect on his emotional stability. Is he mature enough to be away from home for the first time? Not having mommy and daddy tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, by the way, you got to get up. Workouts start at 5:30. Can he be responsible for his time? Who is he hanging out with? What type of crowd is he running with? Now, I'm using the term he because I'm referencing football here exclusively, but this could apply to a variety of sports, male or female. Those are the difficult things to try and identify, because in order to gather that information, you're not going to get it on film, right? You're probably not going to get it from the kid. You may not get it from the kid's coach, because the kid's coach is kind of caught in between, right? He wants to help that kid move on. Part of his job is to help that kid move on. So he doesn't want to hurt him. So he may not always be overly honest with you. So what do you then have to do? You got to go to the athletic trainer, the equipment manager, the groundskeeper, the counselor, the 8th grade principal, the vice principal of the high school he's at when he's a junior. Try and gather all this information, because the ultimate goal is to avoid missing, right? You don't want to miss on a kid. And if you're going to miss, you're probably not going to miss on the athletic stuff. You're going to be able to get that stuff. You're going to be able to see that stuff. It's going to be some variable that either you didn't work hard enough to identify, or you identified it, chose to ignore it, or thought you could fix it. And that happens all the time. And that happens at the NFL level too, guys. Think about this.
Oh, yeah.
Put it in an NFL perspective. The National Football League has 32 teams. They all get one selection in the first round, right? Maybe more if you made a trade, all right? They're dealing with a 21, 22, 23-year-old. They have unlimited resources to uncover every red flag you could possibly uncover to hopefully avoid making a $50 million mistake, right?
Yeah.
The NFL misses on 50% of their first-round draft choices. That's one guy.
Oh,
So
yeah.
imagine being a college coach, and you're expected to bring in 25, 17-year-olds, and they think you're going to be right on all of them. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. You are going to miss, but you can make some preventative measures and create some preventative measures to minimize that if you're willing to put in the work.
That's wild. So kind of going into more of like stuff with that thing and evaluating players, the star system and then kind of the crystal ball system as well. Is that like the best way you could think of how to rank players, or has there ever been talks about ranking in different ways than just like, oh, this guy's a 5-star, this guy's a 4-star?
Right, and that's a really, really good question. We actually, and again, this came from a scouting perspective when we very, very first started this, is we grade on a numerical tier, all right? Each one of those numerical tiers also have a star level equated. So let's just say a grade 90 to 100 is what we would call an elite rare prospect. So he's going to be in the 5-star category. An 80 to 89 would be a 4-star guy. All right. 70 to 79, a 3-star guy. You see where I'm going here. But one of the reasons why we do that is there is a difference between a grade 88 4-star and a grade 81 4-star. They're both 4-stars, but they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. This guy has a little bit more to him than maybe this guy. Doesn't mean this guy's not a 4-star. It just means he's not as far up to where this guy is. So instead of just lumping a bunch of stars together, we wanted to create tiers, because that's what you would do if you were in a pro personnel system or a college scouting model at the NFL level. You're going to assign, everybody has their own grading system. They don't even use stars. Stars are only applied right now because it's the one thing fans gravitate towards, right? Fans identify with a star ranking. All right, they may not have a football background, so when you tell them that guy's a grade 75, what does that mean to them? But if I tell them it's a 3-star, oh, okay, he's a 3-star. But what I'm trying to say to you is if I graded a guy as a grade 78 3-star, he goes to Kansas State. He's a Power 5 guy. We think he's got upside to redshirt, develop, and maybe one day at the collegiate level be a 4-star guy. But the grade 73 player, he is a 3-star player as well, but he goes to Central Michigan. All right, he's not at the same skill level, and that's why we assign the number to differentiate the different players in each one of those tiers. And to be honest with you, our first, I think 5-6 years, we didn't even have a star rank. ESPN.com came to us and said, hey, I think from a fan perspective, it would be good to apply this. Can we add a star ranking to the numerical profile? Absolutely, no problem. It was easy to do, and that's how we decided to break it up.
That's interesting that you said that. I guess, it makes more sense just because the amount of fans that gravitate towards the SAR system, that it ends up kind of being the end-all, be-all, right, because that's what fans see.
That's all they know.
Right. Yeah. So I have a question here, kind of more based on actual football and the guys that are playing nowadays. So, you hear everybody kind of talk about how the SEC is it's different. Like, they recruit different. They have, better recruits up front, especially.
Sure.
What have you seen during your time and kind of analyzing these recruits? A, is that true? And B, is that how accentuated is that difference between the SEC and the other conferences now?
It's not the SEC. It's the footprint by which the SEC has access to that's right in their backyard. That's the thing. So we've often gone back and we've studied the U.S. National Consensus. Comes out every 4 years. And in the U.S. National Consensus, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you can get everything from percentage of the population that's Asian versus a percentage of the population that is white or Latino and it will tell you per state, per region, per capita, where everything lines up, okay? So I've often said, particularly over the last 10 years, all right, that the state of Georgia is a better state of high school football participation per capita than the state of California. Now, a lot of people will say, well, how can you say that? The state of California has 38 million people. Yes, it does. It has 38 million people. But what percentage of that 38 million people is a football playing percentage? And I can assure you it's not even close. Roughly close to 60% of that population is not a football playing percentage of their population. I grew up in Southern California, right? And so everybody, you're biased towards the West Coast. No, I'm not. I'm looking at the numbers. This is what the numbers tell us statistically. Well, when you take a look at the state of Florida and the 5 states that border, all right, so let's just go South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. All right, you just take those states alone. If I'm the University of Florida, or I'm Miami, or I'm Florida State, and there's a great player in the state of Florida, and for whatever reason we don't think we're going to get him, those 3 schools, the big 3 in Florida, could probably go on any given year, go into the state of Georgia, the state of Alabama, the state of Mississippi, or the state of Louisiana, and get the same caliber player out of those states that border on them that they could get in their own state. Yeah. The difference between that and the West Coast from a footprint standpoint is look at the states that border California: Arizona, Nevada, Oregon. Look at the states that border those states: Washington, Idaho, all right, Utah, New Mexico. So if SC or UCLA is in Southern California and they lose a DJ to Clemson, they lose a Tua to Alabama, they lose a Bryce Young to Alabama, they can't just go into New Mexico and replace that guy. Mexico doesn't have enough players. All right, they can't go into Utah and replace that guy. Not enough players. So really, it's about populace. It's about a football playing populace. And when you look and you go back to the 70s and 80s and early 90s, and if you recall, and you guys probably aren't old enough, but all the talk was about Midwest football, right? The state of Pennsylvania, state of Ohio, state of Michigan. You know, some parts of some parts of southern New York. Well, guess what happened? You got a huge population shift because plants, fabrication factories, a lot of those jobs closed. So the population decreased because those families moved out of those areas and moved south into what we have now. So you had what was a very high population of a football playing populace in those areas that no longer exists. All right. So now the southeast footprint is where you have your highest level of football playing population, at least in the high school ranks. And it's why Clemson is what they are. It's why the SEC has such a stranglehold on top level prospects because, I mean, quite honestly, think about this, guys. If Nick Saban at Alabama or Kirby Smart at Georgia, if they wanted to, they could likely recruit their entire roster and not have to get on an airplane.
Oh, yeah. Well, Georgia especially. Yeah. I mean, Kirby Smart could, if he really wanted to, he could probably recruit everybody from only Georgia.
Josh Heupel at Tennessee could get on I-75, all right, drive right down into Atlanta, get on I-85, drive right back up, get to I-40 in North Carolina, turn left, and go right back to Knoxville, and probably be able to find 20 players that could compete for an SEC East title.
Right, yeah.
That's wild, too.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And I think it's very interesting because the way you said it, that, you know, we used to have more of a populace up north or in the Midwest, and Midwestern football is a bigger deal. And now you're kind of seeing that come, like, that is true because the Midwest used to have a big conference, and that was kind of more the Big 12, and now that's not they can't compete with the SEC right now.
Well, let me give you a prime example on that. Nebraska is the single greatest example of that we have in college football right now. I've always said the worst thing to happen to Nebraska football was the advent of cable television. Because if you remember Nebraska in their heyday, you didn't have 85 scholarships. You had 105 scholarships. You didn't have a limited walk-on restriction. You had unlimited walk-ons. And in those days, you basically had 3 networks broadcasting college football. You had Notre Dame playing every week, Alabama playing every week, USC playing every week, right? You had Nebraska. There were these iconic brands, and they were the only brands that you saw, right? Because they played on network television. No internet, no exposure. The only type of media exposure you got was from your local media, all right, whether it be through television, radio, or print. So all of a sudden, the arms race begins. And the late 80s and early 90s occurs. And now you have scholarship reductions, you have walk-on restrictions, you have Prop 48, and cable television comes into play. All of this money floods into all of these other programs that now allow teams to compete on a national level that never had a chance before. So guess what happens? Everybody's facilities become like Nebraska's. Everybody's stadium enhancement becomes like Nebraska's. All right? Everybody's playing on television. Now all of a sudden we have 40 bowls, so everybody's going to a bowl game. The playing field was absolutely leveled when it came to Nebraska. And this is why this job's so hard. So I'm going to give you a prime example because we did the study one year. I want to say it was the 2014 class. I could be off. Don't quote me on that. We did a study of the average miles away from Lincoln, Nebraska, of every player that Nebraska signed in that class. It was over 900 miles.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt that.
Now, think about this. That's before we got into all of this freshmen and sophomores taking unofficial visits and coming to campus 5 times a year. That's before we got into the official visits being allowed in the spring, all right? So now, if you're Scott Frost, if you're a Nebraska coaching staff member, how are you supposed to get elite-level players on your campus when they got to do it on their own dime and they're 700 miles away, whereas Dabo Swinney, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Brian Kelly, Mario Cristobal could throw a rock outside of their office, and within 200 miles in any direction, an elite player, probably 50 of them, could drive to their campus.
Yeah, the transfer portal is their answer.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's incredibly interesting. We could talk about recruiting all day, but I do want to get into what you do on the sidelines a little bit.
Okay.
So I love the sideline reporter. I think it's just an awesome aspect of your Saturdays. But we don't get to watch you, but maybe 4 or 5 times a game. So what do you do when you're not being filmed? And do you bring snacks down there? Like, what does that look like?
So I got to correct you a little bit. When I correct you, you'll understand what I'm getting at here.
Okay.
So I'm technically not a reporter. I have to do reporting duty. So I'm very proud of this because our company came to me about 10 years ago and said, hey, we're thinking about creating a role that we want to call the field analyst, where we want to use what would normally be a booth broadcaster or a studio analyst, which I was at the time, and put them on the field and give a different perspective. And I had a coaching background and a scouting background. So our company came to me and just provided me a wonderful opportunity to see how this could work, because broadcast television on a live event, so much of what you're doing with your broadcast partner, number one, you're standing right next to them if you're in the booth. Number two, you have monitors and all of these different things that can help you up there see replays and be able to kind of get a head start on what's coming. You have a spotter, you have a stat guy. They're all up there, right? But to do what we're doing is you have that element. But if you put me on the field and you open up my mic and I'm conversing with the two guys up in the booth, if you can imagine the difficulty in that, we're doing it blindly. I can't see them. I don't have monitors. I don't have a stat guy. I don't have that type of help. I can't nudge them and say, hey, I'm going to jump in here. None of those sorts of things. So it kind of becomes this dance of learning each other's inflections and pauses and nuances and how to get in here and get in there. So that was a long-winded way of getting around to your answer. Generally, in a normal field reporter role, the field reporter, their mic is closed at all times until they come on air to either give a report of an injury or tell a story or to do the halftime interview going into the locker room or the post-game interview. The only real aspect of the sideline reporter role that I have to combine with my field analyst role is the halftime interview and the post-game interview. Aside from that, I'm down there strictly as an analyst, and my mic is open at all times. So I can chime into the broadcast. I give analysis from a different perspective. And what makes what we do kind of unique is because I'm down there with access sometimes 10 yards from me, 5 yards from me, 20 yards from me, hearing all the sights and sounds, seeing it from this level as opposed to this level, I can give a perspective that they can't give up there, and they can give a perspective up there that I can't give on the field. And what the goal is to mesh those three together, or those two things together. So I'll give you a prime example of kind of something that was kind of cool and how this works. Several years ago, I was working with Dave Pash. As I mentioned, Dave's been my play-by-play guy for 9 years, and Brian Greasy was my original analyst in the booth. We had Minnesota at Nebraska, and Minnesota throws a deep ball down the sideline, down Nebraska's sideline, and completes it. The guy catches it, falls down, goes out of bounds, and I happen to be standing 2 feet from it, all right? So I'm watching the whole entire thing unfold, lands right at my feet, and Bo Pelini is running down the sideline, losing his mind. Now, if you're looking at this on your television set and you're listening to Dave and Brian give their analysis of it, you think that Bo Pelini is screaming his head off at the corner for getting beat on the deep route, right? I'm standing there and I'm literally watching Bo Pelini come down, and he is ripping the safety. Because the reason why the ball was caught is they're in cover 2. The corner played it right. The safety didn't get off the hash. So I was able to immediately chime in and say, hey, guys, this was a cover 2 bust. Bo Pelini's standing right next to me, and he is laying into their safety that was late to get off the hash. Had he gotten off the hash, he makes that play, and he maybe intercepts the ball. Instead, it makes it look like the corner's at fault, and the corner wasn't at fault. So it's those types of moments. I had a situation one time with Jimbo Fisher asking me about, he goes, hey, Tommy, are we on the 3 or are we on the 1.5? What are we on? He's like yelling down at me from the box. And so, just those types of things, I think, and we're very proud of the dynamic we've created. Like I said, Dave and I have been doing it for 9 years. We kind of have this back and forth, and I did 3 years with Brian Greasy. I did another 4 years with Greg McElroy, and then this will be my second year with Dusty Dvorak being up in the booth. Calvin, I know you know Dusty if you're an Oklahoma guy. So it's a lot of fun, and I think that we're able to give a unique perspective and maybe reveal some sights and sounds and some things that happen during a game that you wouldn't otherwise get, and so it's a lot of fun, man. It's different, and it's a lot of work because you're hustling, you're running around. Trust me, there's no time for snacks and drinks. I can tell you that.
Go ahead, Cal.
Go ahead. Good. I was going to say, basically, my question is with this and you being at ESPN for as long as you have, who's been the coolest or your favorite ESPN personality to do things with throughout your time?
Oh, man, that's a tough question to answer. You put me on the spot. I think the one person that, if you ask that question, the one person that would stand out to everybody because he is genuinely such a good guy would be Reese Davis. What you see on TV is what he is in person.
See that?
And that's and again, I think a lot of people would give you that answer. I mean, we have fun in a variety of different ways doing different things, but it's weird because unless you're on a specific event, we're all in different locations all the time. We rarely see each other.
Right.
We may see each other for 2 days at a time. And it's not as if we're all in the same location a lot, and back in the days of ESPNU when we were doing a bunch of studio television, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then you'd travel on Thursday to go do your game, those studio shows, you'd come in contact with a lot of people that you develop relationships with because you're working with them all the time, particularly people that are behind the scenes, producers, directors, PAs, all of those types of people. But I've always found there to be an appreciation for people that you've admired in the profession, and then when you meet them or work with them, they're as advertised, and that's probably why I would say Reese.
Cool, that's really cool.
Yeah, we've just got a couple more questions, or maybe just one or two questions. We'll get you out of here. I don't want to keep you too long, but I guess this is a pretty easy question to answer. So you're obviously on the sideline. What is the loudest stadium that you've been covering a game at so far?
So a lot of people are going to say, no way, that's impossible. And trust me, it's not impossible because I've done it 2 or 3 times. But when Mississippi State is good and they're playing a ranked team at home at night,
sure,
cowbells change everything.
Yeah, that's probably true.
To the point where that ringing will last in your ears till about a Tuesday morning. And if you're on offense and you're caught backed up in the closed end of their end zone, it is deafening. Here's what I would probably say. I think LSU at night, Auburn at night, Clemson's awfully difficult. I think some underrated loud places that people would say, oh, really? Husky Stadium at Washington.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Kinnick Stadium at Iowa. Camp Randall, Madison, Wisconsin. All really, really tough places. It's interesting because I have found in my experience that while the fans are devoted and passionate, Michigan is not that loud of a place to play. I've always been surprised and I mean, it's 8,000, 110,000 fans.
Yeah.
Knoxville can really get rocking. I think a lot of it too, it depends on the kick time, right? If it's noon, 3:30 or prime time, because you got to take into account how long the fans have had a chance to get lubed up before they got to jump into the stadium and get rowdy, and so, but no, I've been very fortunate. I'm generally on the noon or 3:30 ABC crew, which means when you're in that window, you're rarely going to go past the central time zone. So I'm going to be calling games every week, either in the Big 10, Big 12, SEC, or ACC. And then sometimes we'll get like one of those Pac-12 after dark games where, SC's playing Utah or, Arizona State's playing Oregon. But I think that for the most part, I'm trying to think, I don't know if there's a stadium in the Big. Yeah, I have not been to Oklahoma State. That's one of the few. In 9 years, I've never gotten. No, I've had an Oklahoma State game. I just never had.
I remember, I remember you doing the Pitt game, the OSU Pitt game.
The
Mason Rudolph. Yeah,
and then I'm trying, but in the Big 12, that's the only one. Big 10, I've been everywhere in the Big 10. And I'm trying to think, SEC, ACC, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've driven to half of those stadiums. So, yeah, not many I've missed there.
Right. You'll have to come out to Boone Pickens.
I know
and that's why your answer wasn't Boone Pickens. Because if you come to Boone Pickens, that'll be your answer above and beyond. It's no question at this point.
I know one thing, the fans are right on top of you.
Oh, yeah, yes. You're not going to have much room. That's the problem.
But, Tom, we want to thank you for your time, man. We really do appreciate this. It's been a good time. Real quick, do you have any nicknames that you go by before we get you out of here?
So when I was growing up, like I told you, I was the son of a coach, and my last name's Luginbill, and my dad's nickname was Coach Loogie, so I became Little Loogie, which is kind of funny because my dad and Steve Spurrier go back a long ways, and Spurrier calls me Loogie. But for whatever reason, everybody in this profession, and I do not know why, I somehow got nicknamed Loogs. All right, and I don't know how you spell it. You either spell it Loogs or Loogz. And I would say, well, shouldn't it be Lugs? But that's lugs. So that doesn't make sense.
Right.
And I can tell you exactly who started it. It was a producer in Charlotte, North Carolina at ESPNU back in 2005. His name's Pete Waters. He just randomly started calling me Lugs. And then it started to become where that's all I literally answered to. And I swear to this day, I bet you if I walked into that building tomorrow, there would be people in that building after 18 years that probably don't know my first name. That's how much of a nickname has followed me.
Yeah.
around.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
That
So
is
it's certainly
hilarious.
stuck.
But, we were just wondering because yesterday, jokingly, one of us said, call him Tommy Lou. So that's really funny that
That's
your
happened
nickname
too.
was
Yeah,
that.
there you go. That's fine. I go by anything.
But, man, we do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, man.
You bet, guys. Have a great weekend, okay?
Yeah, you take
Thank you. Thank you.
See ya.
That's it.